Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming today. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I know it rained a little bit today and so forth like that, but it's starting to clear up and everyone's coming in. We have a good group right now, so we do appreciate that. Now, our event today is entitled Little Known Stories of Reconstruction, which is sponsored by the SC Humanities, a not-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. The Humanities Council receives funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And because this is SC Humanities event, I just want to go ahead and take the time to recognize any of their board members or staff members we may have with us today, as well as any of our library board, friends in the library, or any of our city officials we may have. So if you are any of these, would you please either stand, raise your hand, or just give a gesture if you'd like to, so we can acknowledge you today. Everyone's good? All right. Okay. Our guest speaker today is currently an adjunct professor of world civilizations, United States and African American history at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, and has taught U.S. history and African American studies at the College of Charleston. He is also a weekly columnist, or also was a weekly columnist for the Charleston Coastal Times for several years, and is an accomplished author with such works as the 1895 segregation fight in South Carolina, Mr. Potts and Me, Voices of Black South Carolina, Legend and Legacy, and Stories of Black South Carolina. In addition to all of this, he has done research and articles for several different books and encyclopedias on African American culture and history. He also conducts He also conducts a walking tour called The Lost Stories of Black Charleston. He has appeared on numerous radio and television shows in the U.S., Canada, Japan, and the U.K., and has received a citation from the South Carolina House of Representatives for his work in education, historical research, and human rights. And he was also given the key to the city of Spartanburg. His motto is, the more you learn there is to learn. So would you join me in welcoming our guest today?
Now, thank you. Some of you might know that as Deep River, Lord. My home is over Jordan. Deep River, Lord. I got to cross over in the campground. Now, during slavery, when they would sing things like that, the slave owner would listen to those lyrics and say, oh, what a wonderful song about going to the river and getting baptized. No. What that was about was a disguised way of expressing their desire to go across places like the Ohio River and out of slavery and into freedom. And the point of that is that even though these individuals were barred from literacy, because, as Frederick Douglass once correctly said, knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave, they still had a sort of folk wisdom enough to know how to sing things like that, to disguise it, to express themselves at the same time without putting themselves in danger. And it is this kind of cleverness that you're going to see as the story progresses. Now, before I start talking about Reconstruction, there are a couple of things that I have to make clear in order for the story to make sense. Anybody here hear of a man by the name of James Henry Hammond? Does that name ring a bell to anybody here? James Henry Hammond was a South Carolina representative in the 1800s that wrote what he called the Mudsill Theory. And the Mudsill Theory goes like this. He said that every society must have its mudsill, i.e. its lower class, to do the physical work to maintain that society, while the other part of that society has to be educated to be the brains of that society. In other words, and then he also added, quote, and this is a direct quote from him, "Fortunately, in the South, we have found a race to suit that purpose," you see, within the system of slavery. And another thing that's important to understand, too, is that one of the major reasons for racial discord in the United States is the idea that, as a fear that I'm going to get into a little bit later as we get into our story. So, our story begins in part in the 1860s, when you have the Civil War, the South breaking away from the Union once Lincoln was elected, because they kind of see what's coming down the road if he's elected. And Lincoln at first did not want African Americans serving in the Union Army for fear of offending the whites of the border states. That is, the states like Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, because they were slave-owning states, but they refused to join the Confederacy. So he felt that he needed, of course, these numbers on his side. So he was careful about kind of rocking the boat early on. But then, on May the 13th, 1862, a great man by the name of Robert Smalls, who was born in Beaufort in slavery, the Confederates had him sailing a Confederate ship called the Planter, Charleston Harbor. But he was slick. One night, he called his friends and family together, and he said, "All right, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to, since I'm sailing this boat, I'm going to sneak y'all on it and sail y'all out of freedom and out of Charleston Harbor and into Union-occupied waters. Now, do understand that if we get caught, we will either get sold back into slavery or killed. So is there anybody who does not want to go along with us or take that risk?" Two of them went, "Well, see, Robert, I don't know about that. That's kind of a big risk there. I don't know. All right. The two of y'all, go, but keep your mouths shut." And they did. So most people know this part of the story. He sailed the boat out of Confederate waters and passed it into the Union waters and freed himself and the family, and the boat was given to the United States Navy. Abraham Lincoln met with him a short time afterward, and that was one of the things that persuaded Abraham Lincoln to allow African Americans to serve in the Union Army. And Abraham Lincoln would go on to credit the African American troops with being a major force in helping the Union Army win the Civil War. So here's where things get interesting. Lincoln evolved in his attitudes through his negotiations with Frederick Douglass. And Lincoln had a whole lot in common with Frederick Douglass. Lincoln only had 3 months of formal education in his whole life, but he was so well read that he wrote all of his own speeches, which are masterpieces of eloquence. Frederick Douglass was, of course, forbidden to go to school because he was enslaved. He never set a day in his life in a classroom. But yet, many of the eloquent things he wrote today are difficult for even modern college students to fully comprehend, because they are that deep and that eloquent. So anyway, at Lincoln's second inaugural, he gave this great, great speech about with charity to all and malice to none, and of course breaking the bond of the slave owner and so forth, right? Great speech. Frederick Douglass was there enjoying it. But then there was the matter of his vice president, Andrew Johnson of Tennessee. Lincoln got up there and made that great, great speech about the second inaugural address that's next to where his memorial is in Washington, D.C. Andrew Johnson, on the other hand, came up on the stand like this. "Ladies and gentlemen of the United States, I am now the vice president," and Lincoln's like, "Get off the stage. Douglas is like, I pray to God that Mr. Lincoln lives a long life.
Oh, interesting.
Well, after it was all over with, Lincoln invited Frederick Douglass over to the White House, and they talked up and said, "Did you like my speech, Mr. Douglass?" "Why, sir, that was a Herculean effort." "Yes, Mr. Douglass, I have great things in mind." Well, a couple of months later, April 9th, 1865, General Lee surrenders to General Grant at Appomattox in Virginia. End of the Civil War. April the 11th, Lincoln gets up to the White House and makes this great, great speech. And among the things that he says in his last address is, quote, "Due to the bravery of the colored soldiers, it is no reason why they should not get the franchise and send their children to public schools." Well, there was a fellow in the audience who didn't like that too much. You might have heard of him. His name was John Wilkes Booth. And he pulled out his pistol and said, "Why, there's no good little sidewinder out of, hey, what's the matter with you, John? Put that up. Don't do that now." "But did you hear him? He said he's going to let the Yeah, I heard all of that. But listen, you got to be wise about this. We have to be methodical. We have to plan. A word about this John Wilkes Booth. See, he had a brother named Edwin, who was also an actor. And in 1862, Edwin was in New York waiting on a train, and he saw a young man fall in the way of the train and pulled him out, and the young man's father thanked him for it. The young man's name, by the way, was Robert Todd Lincoln. So Edwin Booth saved Abraham Lincoln's son's life. Let that sink in for a moment. So then a few days later, Lincoln says to Mary Todd, "Well, you know, dear, we hadn't had a chance to really enjoy ourselves ever since this war started. Let's go to a play." "What's playing?" "Well, let's see here, Abe. There's Our American Cousin by Laura Keene is there." "Oh, Laura Keene, she's pretty funny." "Yeah, well, let's go there and enjoy ourselves." Headline in the paper the next day: "Lincoln's to attend Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Well, while they're there, they go to the play, have a great time, and the guard standing outside of the door where Lincoln is in the box seat, he hears them laughing at the play. "Golly, I think I'd better go on in there and hear this play myself. This sure sounds like a funny program in there." And this fool leaves his post and sits down not too far from the Lincolns. Meanwhile, John Wilkes comes up behind him, sees the guards not there, busts through the door, "Pay-ow!" Jumps on the stage, yells, "Sit semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, and hobbles off the stage. And meanwhile, Frederick Douglass is up in his home in Rochester, New York. Oh my goodness, this is terrible news. I hope he gets better. And yes, Mr. Douglass, yes, special delivery from Washington, D.C. "Oh, what is it?" "Well, first, it's my sad duty to tell you that Mr. Lincoln has died from his wounds." "Oh, my goodness." "But on the other hand, Mrs. Lincoln has presented you with Abraham Lincoln's walking cane for all the service you have done in recruiting the Negro troops and for giving him advice during this war." "Why, thank you. I appreciate that." "Oh, my goodness. So Mr. Lincoln is dead, and now I have his cane. But wait, if Mr. Lincoln is dead, no! Guess who's president?" Andrew Johnson. You got it. And Andrew's making a hot mess of things. And so to make a very long story short, he gets impeached because he's making a hot mess of things. He's allowing the South to run buck wild and having black codes and things like that. And so fortunately you have these people in the North like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumter who basically tell Andrew that he has to go. So they impeach him, but he escapes removal by one vote and chooses not to run for election in 1868, which is a good thing. Because over a 5-year period, the federal government tries to reform the South by passing 3 constitutional amendments. The 13th, which was passed when Abraham Lincoln was alive, said that all persons born here, that there'd be no more slavery in the United States. That's over with. And the 14th Amendment in 1868 says all persons born here are citizens with the rights thereof. And the 15th Amendment in 1870 says all men born here have the right to vote. Women would get that in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. So this led to the largely forgotten fact that during that 12-year period of Reconstruction, black men in the South were voting and electing their own representatives. 2,000 African-American men served in office. One of them, by the way, was from right here in Sumter, George Washington Murray, who was also an inventor, who in the 1890s published a list of black inventors that I've included in my book, True Stories of Black South Carolina, by the way. So, and incidentally, he's also James Clyburn's cousin. Little aside there. So anyway, as all this is going on, miracles are taking place throughout the South. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in 1872, they impeached a corrupt governor named Henry Warmoth for racketeering and embezzlement. And they replaced him with the first African-American governor. His name was Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback. And he did such an excellent job as the interim governor that he decided to run for the U.S. Senate from Louisiana in 1873, which would have made him the second. The first was Hiram Revels of Mississippi. However, even though he legitimately won, the U.S. Senate refused to seat him. Gee, I wonder why. What did he do? Why did they do that? So he appealed before the Democratic Party to no avail. And he appealed before the Republican Party to no avail. So according to the United States Congressional Record of June 8, 1874, page 432 to 433, Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback got up before the body of the United States House of Representatives and said, I am a man, and I am an American citizen, with all of the rights and the privileges that are due to an American citizen. But I say to you that from this day forward, I shall not follow the dictates of the Democratic Party. I shall not follow the dictates of the Republican Party. From this day forward, I shall only follow the dictates of my heart and of my conscience. And he still didn't get it. However, in spite of all of that, though, in 1880, he was one of the founders of Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, one of the largest and oldest black colleges in America, before he died in 1921. Meanwhile, here in South Carolina, they're really doing some business. From 1870 to 1877, there were 2 black lieutenant governors of South Carolina, Alonzo Jacob Ramsier from 1870 to 1872 of Charleston, and Richard Howell Gleaves from 1872 to 1877. Richard Howell Gleaves was lieutenant governor under Governor Franklin Jacob Moses of Sumter. Note that name, Franklin Jacob Moses. That was the first time in American history, ladies and gentlemen, that a state was run by a black lieutenant governor and a Jewish governor. That would not happen again until New York in the early 2000s. And so over at the University of South Carolina, 1873, Henry Hayne of Marlborough became the first African-American student at that school and at any school at all in the Deep South. And so this was led by the fact that you had black women going there for teacher's education. One of them of Columbia was Celia Dial Saxon, born in slavery in 1857, and she would go on to die in 1935 at her desk while grading papers while teaching at Booker T. Washington High School in Columbia. Okay? And plus they had the first African-American professor in the South over at USC during that period, Richard T. Greener, whose statue is now in front of the library at the University of South Carolina. Oh, these folks were no joke. Now, and plus, in 1868, in front of what is now the Julius Wade Tees Waring Judicial Center in Charleston, From January to April of 1868, 76 blacks and 48 whites gathered to rewrite the Constitution of South Carolina into the most progressive document in American history up to that time. The Declaration of Rights that was passed in South Carolina would soon be the template for other southern states to be readmitted into the Union. That revolutionary document called for such things as all laws pertaining to racial discrimination be stricken from the books. Women would be allowed to divorce abusive husbands. There would be state hospitals and mental institutions. No one would go to jail for debt. And on January 23rd, 1868, over at that courthouse, the great Robert Smalls got up and said these words: resolved, all children in South Carolina between the ages of 7 and 14 must attend public school at least 6 months a year under penalty of non-compliance. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the first public school law ever passed this far south, below the Mason-Dixon line. Now, when I bring up these things, people usually ask me two questions. Number one, why haven't I heard any of this before? And number two, well, what in the heck happened? I'll explain them both. Throughout the history of the Deep South, the wealthy class of whites' deepest fear was that the poor whites, in their poverty and illiteracy and subjugation, would find common cause with their black brethren and come together to create a revolution that would overthrow the rule of the wealthy class of whites of the South. So, to prevent that from happening, the wealthy class of whites indoctrinated the poor whites into the idea that if black people had equality with them, the poor whites would be pushed to the bottom of society. In simple terms, ladies and gentlemen, divide and conquer of the poor so that the rich could stay rich. And that's what racism is all about, Charlie Brown. So in Pulaski, Tennessee, on December 24th, 1865, at the county courthouse, 6 Confederate veterans gathered to form the Resistance Army against Reconstruction. They named themselves after the Greek word for circle, which is kuklos, and the Scottish word for family, which is clan. You see where that went? That's how the Ku Klux Klan started. So for the next 12 years, the Southland bathed in blood as blacks and whites battled it out in the streets. Memphis Massacre 1866, New Orleans Massacre 1866, Meridian, Mississippi Massacre 1871, Colfax, Louisiana Massacre 1873, Vicksburg, Mississippi Massacre 1874, Clinton, Mississippi Massacre 1875, Hamburg, South Carolina Massacre 1876, Ellington, South Carolina Massacre 1876, and November the 8th, 1876, on Broad Street in Charleston, blacks and whites shot and battled it out in the streets. The federal government said, yo, this is too much. We can't handle this mess here. We got to put a stop to this foolishness. And they passed the Tilden-Hayes Compromise on February 26, 1877 to end Reconstruction. And one of the many negative outcomes of that ending was that Mildred Rutherford and her organization, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, went on a national crusade to censor things like that out of the history books used in classrooms and replace it with pro-Confederate narratives. So much so that in 1978, when I was in the 8th grade at Moultrie Middle School in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, the South Carolina history book by Mary Sims Oliphant, Laidlaw Press, 1970, page 280, taught our class, quote, after the Civil War, the Negroes lost their heads, so the Ku Klux Klan was formed in Tennessee to bring order and stability back to the South. Fortunately for me, when I was a boy, I was a bookworm. I was a weirdo. I was bad at sports. So I read a lot. And among the things I read was Langston Hughes' Pictorial History of the Negro in America, and Eyewitness the Negro in American History by William Loren Katz. Those books were my vaccination against what I was infected with in the classroom. But other kids weren't that fortunate. And this is one of the reasons why I tell young people nowadays, the geek shall inherit the earth. So, in Jackson, Mississippi, in 1890, Governor James K. Vardaman called the Mississippi legislature together to throw out the progressive Reconstruction Constitution and replace it with one calling for segregation. Here in South Carolina, Benjamin Ryan Tillman, former governor who would become senator, who was once a member of the Sweetwater Sable Club, one of the perpetrators of the Hamburg Massacre of 1876. And also in 1893, he sent an African American in Denmark, South Carolina, named John Peterson to a lynch mob. Benjamin Ryan Tillman called the South Carolina legislature to throw out the progressive Reconstruction Constitution and replace it with one calling for segregation. However, as described in my book, The 1895 Segregation Fight in South Carolina, 6 black leaders, Robert Smalls, who we just discussed, William J. Whipper, a black lawyer from Charleston, James Wiggin Isaiah Reed, 2 black lawyers from Beaufort, South Carolina, Thomas Ezekiel Miller, the founding president of South Carolina State University in Orangeburg, and Robert Anderson, black teacher from Georgetown. Those 6 brave men risked their lives to go before the South Carolina legislature to argue eloquently against the segregation Constitution of 1895. How eloquent were they? Let's take a look at this. Now, it's important to frame this up, by the way, by saying that after what happened in Mississippi, the South was slowly turning toward this level. In Charleston, on November the 12th, 1879, 6 black men from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, were brought up on trumped-up charges of voting while illiterate. And several of the men were, in fact, illiterate, and they would ridicule them on the stand by asking them about the Constitution and George Washington and Christopher Columbus and such things. One of them, however, was a man by the name of J.B. Maxwell, James Buchanan Maxwell, who was born on the James Maxwell Plantation in Flat Rock, North Carolina in 1856. And unbeknownst to the court, he came down after emancipation to reunite with his parents at Boone Hall Plantation, and he would later attend the Avery Institute in Charleston, one of the first major schools for black people in Charleston. And he graduated in 1873. So when they brought him up on the stand, they figured that he was as illiterate as the others and would have sport with him, but he repeatedly answered questions by going, "I can read, I can read, I can read." And this flummoxed the judge and the prosecuting attorney, and finally the judge banged the gavel and dismissed him from the case. Side note, J.B. Maxwell was my great-grandfather. And for many years, growing up, I thought that story was just an old wives' tale and a family legend that my mother and them used to tell. But in 2016, my cousin Cheryl Washington James, who was once the head library in St. George and later in Charleston, she's my cousin, and she found the transcript at the Charleston County Library, and it's in my current book, The Black Folk Tales and Chronicles of South Carolina. But anyway, before Benjamin Tillman did his thing, this is from the Charleston News and Courier of August 29, 1892, said this: "A separate list of all Negro voters must be kept and returned with the poll list. Every Negro applying to vote must produce a written statement by 10 white men who shall swear that they know of their advantage that they have voted for Governor Wade Hampton in 1876 and have voted that ticket continuously ever since. This statement must be placed in the ballot by the managers." Translation, they don't want them to vote. And what they did was sidestep the 15th Amendment by not coming right out and saying that you can't vote because you're black. So they would do all these little other side things to get around that, all right? So anyway, getting back to the convention. So one of the first things that they cleared was trying to make it illegal for interracial marriages in South Carolina. So Robert Smalls got up there on October 2nd, 1895 and said, "Gentlemen, we should have a law against that sort of thing, but I also propose that we have an addendum to that. That should also be illegal for white men to have Negro women as concubines in South Carolina." Their reaction was just like yours just now. They were like, and were totally shocked. But they, of course, that part of the amendment was defeated, but people around the world reading about this in the newspapers admired Robert Small's legislative skill and confounding these folks. So then Thomas Miller got up on the stand and said this: call us aliens, we aliens, the people who are the foundation of the American citizen, aliens, a people who by our sweat assisted in the clothing the barren rocks of the Northeast in Bengur, who drained the swamps of the South and made them to mimic gold in harvest time, who by our endurance, toil, and suffering made it possible for our white neighbors to establish this government, the asylum of us all, who by our toil established the canal and railroad system of the country. Call us aliens. If you call us aliens, then to whom can the term citizens be applied? No joke, huh? Well, let's get back to Robert Smalls. My race has honored me with a seat on this floor, and I shall serve them to the best of my ability. My race needs no special defense, for the past history of them in this country proves them to be the equal of any people anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life. I am proud of them, and by their acts toward me, I know they are not ashamed of me, for they have at all times honored me with their votes. William J. Whipper. This convention is making a great mistake in not giving the Negro latitude. The car of Negro progress is coming, and instead of allowing it to come on, you wish to stop it. You may just as well make up your minds that the Negro will rise. We will not be crushed. The Negro will rise sooner or later. Crush us as you may. The Negro, with our perseverance and our pluck, will and must come out. We cannot be kept down forever. It is not the nature of human affairs. And these gentlemen in their eloquence had a little bit of unexpected help from down in Tuskegee, Alabama, the best-known black leader of his time, Booker Telephero Washington, who had walked 400 miles from Malden, West Virginia, to Hampton, Virginia, to get an education at Hampton, and was later appointed to be the leading principal of Tuskegee University. This is what he had to say to Benjamin Ryan Tillman. You, honored senator, are a student of history. Has there ever been a race that has been helped by ignorance? Has there ever been a race that has been harmed by Christian intelligence? Have these educated women or men hindered a state or its reputation? Honored sir, do not misunderstand me. I am not so selfish as to make this appeal to you in the interest of my race alone. But thank God a white man is near to my heart as a black man. But I appeal to you in the interest of humanity, that whatsoever a man soweth, he shall also reap. And he predicted that by shutting the gates of higher education and opportunity to the black population, it would create an ignorant majority in South Carolina, and added, who would invest in a state where ignorance, poverty, and crime abounded? Prophecy. Because by 1948, 62% of African Americans and 18% of the whites of South Carolina were illiterate. And in World War II, many were so illiterate that they were not allowed to serve in World War I or II because of this. Like he said, what you sow, you shall reap. But in spite of all of this, the vote came down on December 4th, 1895. And to the surprise of everyone, these African Americans made their case so plain that two white representatives, T.E. Dudley out of Marlboro and John Halston Reed out of Georgetown, voted with the blacks. And both of them said that if you let this Constitution pass, the wrath of the federal government will come down upon us for violating the 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And they voted with the African Americans in a vote that led to 116-7. Robert Smalls said that I would rather walk home to Beaufort before I sign that rag of a new Constitution. And the blacks sustained some signing. And as the African Americans left the chamber, Benjamin Tillman and his comrades linked arms and began to sing, "Lord be with you until we meet again." But that was all right. the African American Masonic Lodge over off of Hardin Street, threw a big banquet for the men. Thomas Miller went on to serve as president of the newly established South Carolina State University, and Robert Smalls continued in his position till 1913. But, however, James Wigg and Isaiah Reed, they were banished from the record at that point. No one knows when they died or anything of that sort. William J. Whipper passed in an unmarked grave, and Robert Anderson died in 1901. And the last African American who served in Congress during this Reconstruction period was George Henry White out of Wilmington, North Carolina. And he held this position until shortly after the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. He served until 1901. And he said this: "This, Mr. Chairman, is the Negro's temporary farewell to the American Congress. But let me say this, Phoenix-like, he will rise up someday and come again. These parting words are on behalf of an outraged, heartbreaking, bruised and bleeding, but God-fearing people, faithful, industrious, loyal people, rising people full of potential force." George Henry White died in 1918. And in 1966, when Martin Luther King came to speak in Kingstree, South Carolina, he repeated those very words when African Americans were starting to vote again in 1966, Dr. King did. And it turned out that George Henry White's prediction came true quicker than he thought. He died in 1918, the same year as Benjamin Tillman. And in 1928, up in Chicago, they elected the first black representative since Reconstruction, Oscar DePriest. And in February of 1930, February 10, 1930, Oscar DePriest came into Congress accompanied by two men, John Roy Lynch of Mississippi and Thomas Miller of South Carolina. And he asked for time on the congressional floor, and they said yes. And he said these words: "Mr. Speaker and members of the House, I wish to call to attention the fact that we have two ex-members of the House present today, and I wish to present them to you. One is ex-Congressman John Roy Lynch, who served from the 5th District of Mississippi and the 43rd and 47th Congress. The other one is Thomas Miller, who served from the 7th District of South Carolina in the 51st Congress. I am glad to have the privilege of presenting these gentlemen to you. They happen to be the gentlemen of the racial group which I am identified, so I am not the only one left." And he said that to great applause. And 17 years later, Judge Julius Waties Waring of Charleston ruled in a case called Elmore versus Rice that those laws preventing African Americans from voting in South Carolina since Reconstruction violated the 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and said it is time for South Carolina to rejoin the Union. And that is what led to my parents and their generation of black people voting in South Carolina. And it is important that I conclude that with a rendition of this, which the lyrics of some of you probably know. For those of you who don't know, the lyrics to that went, oh freedom over me, and before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free." Thank you.